Yeah, I love the Cult. They've been through some wild stuff, and great band, great band. Let's take the opportunity to talk about some great writing right now, everybody. We're going to go Outer Limits time for Wordsmith Wednesday, and we're going to discuss a character. See if you can tell me who this character is. This is a character who appeared over 100 years ago and dominated, books, magazines, radio. They even did a TV series in the 60s for decades and decades and decades. This character was incredibly popular, and very few people actually know this character at all now. British character, a sleuth and an adventurer, had a sidekick, much like Holmes and Watson, but sort of became involved with other things. You know, Holmes traditionally was never involved with the supernatural, but this character did get involved with supernatural things. You let me know if you can guess who it is. I'll give you a hint. His initials are SB. Think about it.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur, or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
Right. Thank you, Control Voice. Thank you, man. Great to have the Control Voice back with us. And let's take the opportunity to tell you. Let's see if anybody could guess who this character was. It's not Sherlock Holmes. It's not James Bond. It's not Sidney Riley. It's not the Avengers. It's not anybody like that. SB. And actually, it's not, he didn't even start as SB. Let me show you. This is a gigantic volume with an introduction from Michael Moorcock, edited by George Mann, who's done a lot with Sherlock Holmes collections, of Sexton Blake, Detective. Sexton Blake. Gee, looks kind of like somebody we might know from the Victorian era. Sexton Blake. Interesting. Who was Sexton Blake? And why is it that so many people don't know Sexton Blake? He's been around for over 100 years, was literally in the canon of British history as one of the most popular detectives in British history, and virtually nobody in the United States knows who Sexton Blake is. Not only that, Sexton Blake has had over 200 authors write Sexton Blake stories. Novels, short stories, things that dominated the newspapers and the serials, radio shows. And I'll show you in a second how they infiltrated all sorts of entertainment. Sexton Blake. Well, let's find out. If we go over to fantastic fiction, you'll see that if you go to Sexton Blake, there are actually two Sexton Blake sections, but this is one of them. The Case of the Murdered Financier, 1937. Three Frightened Men, 1938. Here's the list. These are all novels. Novels. 1937 all the way through to 1968. Sexton Blake. Interesting. So we're going to just click on this. Now we go over here. Let me put this in. Let me show you something. Watch. Let me show you the character. Check out the series. Because when you see this, there are actually two entries. There are three. 67 books, 56 books and one book. Okay? It's crazy. There's the one we were looking at before from 1937, The Case, Murdered Financier. This one, 1933, The Survivor's Secret, The Taxicab Murder. Look at all of these books. Now, why they have them under two separate things, I don't know on fantasticfiction.com. I don't know. And then there's this one, 2023, by Michael Moorcock and Mark Hodder, A Sexton Blake Story, released in 2023. Okay, so let me give you some background on Sexton Blake, because I think you might find this really interesting. So if you can go to Wikipedia, you can go to a lot of different places and find out about Sexton Blake. I'll give you an example over at Thrift Books. Here is one of the books, The Case Book of Sexton Blake. David Stewart Davies put this together. Now, that is pretty much the other of the two big volumes. This collects a lot of his short stories. That one collects a lot of his short stories, too. So, as you can see here, it says, welcome to the breathtaking adventures of Sexton Blake. For the greater part of the 20th century, the countless escapades of super sleuth Sexton Blake kept millions of readers on the edge of their seats. Together with his faithful sidekick, the youthful Tinker, and his intelligent bloodhound Pedro, he stood firm against an onslaught of crime and villainy, defeating his enemies with his extraordinary powers of deduction, iron fists, and unyielding determination. This thrilling collection presents 7 exploits from his golden age. Now, he happened to live not too far from Sherlock Holmes, near Charing Cross Station. You don't know exactly where he lived, but they say he lived within a 5-mile radius of Charing Cross Station. That's all you know about him. And the fascinating thing was, his name wasn't originally Sexton Blake. I think his name was originally Frank Blake or Francis Blake. And the original author who wrote him was named Hal Meredith. His real name was Harry Blythe, B-L-Y-T-H. And the story started for Sexton Blake in 1893 because the Holmes stories were so popular. So let me give you some of the background that I've dug up on this. Now, you can go to Wikipedia. There's a pretty good entry at Wikipedia, but I'm not going to read to you the Wikipedia stuff. I want to go to what I put together for you. Sexton Blake, and I'll put this into a little white paper for people on the entertainment side of my Substack. Sexton Blake is a fictional British detective who captivated audiences for over 8 decades, from 1893 to 1978, and again now in 2023, appearing in more than 4,000 stories by approximately 200 authors. Known as the poor man's Sherlock Holmes, Blake's adventures were action-packed, melodramatic, and featured colorful villains, distinguishing him from the more cerebral Holmes. His stories spanned various formats, including comic strips, novels, radio serials, silent films, and a 1960s ITV television series. Did any of you know about this stuff? So I've had this book for a while, and I've been waiting to spring this on you. After I did the Scarecrow and stuff like that, I was like, I got to tell them about Sexton Blake. And they were translated into over 20 languages during his peak popularity in the 1920s and 30s. Sexton Blake was created, and this is kind of a quirky thing, created by Harvey Blythe, B-L-Y-T-H, a London-based freelance journalist born in 1852, writing under the pseudonym Hal Meredith. Blythe penned the first few Blake stories, but he died in 1898, after which the character was developed by numerous other writers, editors, and artists. Now, what's interesting is it looks like this company called the Amalgamated Press either had the rights to this character, or these authors worked with Amalgamated Press to continue, and maybe they had permission by Blythe's estate or something. But this Amalgamated Press was the major thing for quite a while. They actually called it the AP, interestingly enough. So they said after which the character was developed by numerous other writers, editors, and artists, making it a collaborative franchise, sort of like a Nancy Drew sort of a thing. The Amalgamated Press under media baron Alfred Harmsworth, purchased the copyright to Blake for £9, ensuring his longevity through various authors. Sexton Blake debuted in the story The Missing Millionaire, published in the Halfpenny Marvel number 6 on December 20th, 1893. The Halfpenny Marvel was a story paper aimed at teenage boys. It was owned by the Amalgamated Press. Blythe wrote 6 additional Blake tales, 3 for the Halfpenny Marvel and 3 for the Union Jack, a story paper launched in April of 1894. From August 1905, Blake became the resident character in the Union Jack, appearing in every issue until it became Detective Weekly in 1933, and many people are familiar with that. The success of longer tales in the Boys' Friend Library led to the creation of the Sexton Blake Library in 1915, which ran for nearly 50 years, publishing up to 5 issues monthly at its height. So no wonder so many authors would write for this. There was a market for it. So people were like, I could write a Sexton Blake story. I love Sexton Blake. I want to do it. Now, curiously enough, Sexton Blake's tales share thematic and stylish connections with other famous fictional characters, particularly Sherlock Holmes, but also feature unique elements and a few crossovers. But there haven't been any direct crossovers. So with Sherlock Holmes, Blake is often compared to Holmes due to his Baker Street residence, analytical skills, and sidekick, Tinker, aka Dr. Watson. However, Blake's adventures leaned more towards pulp fiction with action-oriented plots and exotic villains, unlike Holmes's focus on deduction. Early stories positioned Blake as a more adventurous counterpart, especially after Holmes's apparent death at the Reichenbach Falls in 1891. Prime time to bring this character around, with Blake debuting shortly after. Initially named Frank Blake, his name was changed to Sexton, possibly to evoke a distinct identity while capitalizing on Holmes's popularity. Sexton, Sherlock, whatever. Fu Manchu-like villains. So as you know, Fu Manchu from Sax Rohmer, Blake faced villains like Prince Wu Ling and the Brotherhood of the Yellow Beetle, which echoed the Yellow Peril stereotype popularized by Sax Rohmer's Fu Manchu. These characters reflected contemporary fears of Eastern threats to the British Empire, a trope also seen in stories of other detectives like Nelson Lee and Dixon Hawk. Now, remember when we talked about Charlie Chan, the creation of Charlie Chan was an inspiration because this guy who originally had studied over in the East Coast had moved to the West Coast and seen the Yellow Peril stuff there in the 1920s and thought, he went to Hawaii. He was very impressed by a Hawaiian detective there. And he thought, I'd like to base stories on a guy that people could identify with and see as a respectable gentleman from Asia. So he created the very famous character of Charlie Chan. And so that's very interesting because the Yellow Peril thing is easily understood on the West Coast, not excused, but easily understood on the West Coast because there were a lot of people who didn't like the competition from Asian migrants coming in. They had, of course, in 1872, they had the Chinese Exclusion Act in California to stop those migrants. That was challenged, and that's what ended up being the Qilong decision in 1875 in the Supreme Court, which federalized immigration, and then that was completely wrong to have done. It's a state issue. And again, if you're just watching this, you will not find the word immigration in the federal Constitution. If you're watching on the Entertainment Channel, you can check that out on my other work in Liberty Conspiracy. But interestingly enough, a similar thing was happening over in England. And as I mentioned last week when we talked about David Morrell's really, really good trilogy about this 1850s sleuth, that's very interesting because the DeChancey character encounters in the first book something that is sort of a residue of the dying days of the Victorian Empire and that Oriental conflict with the Yellow Peril. So they had their own Yellow Peril thing going on in England as the British Empire dried up and the empire started to recede. that became a big matter. There was, of course, the residue of the drug trade that the empire itself had started pretty much with its own people and trying to influence China. And then you've got a parallel over on the West Coast in the United States. So that's quite interesting. Interesting that, that this is interesting. They had this guy named Prince Wu Ling and the Brotherhood of the Yellow Beetle. Now, they also brought this up. There was a guy, some Blake stories were written by authors like John Creasy, who also created a character named Norman Conquest. Norman Conquest. This overlap in authorship suggests stylish similarities. Then we've got a guy named Victor Drago. In 1979, a proposed Sexton Blake series for the comic Tornado was retitled Victor Drago due to a contract dispute. And they had this thing called the Criminals Confederation and Super Crooks. That was Blake's rogue gallery. So very interesting. It's sort of superhero-esque sort of thing. That started in 1919 to 1926. So you can see how it would appeal to kids. They also had science fiction elements in there. Interestingly enough, Arthur Machen gets mixed into this. Some Blake stories, particularly in the Sexton Blake library, incorporated mild sci-fi elements, connecting them to speculative fiction trends. For example, A Touch of Evil, 1959, by Arthur McLean. Oh, I'm sorry. I mistyped this. It's Arthur McLean, not Arthur Machen. Arthur McLean feature a space virus. Countdown to Murder by George Sidney involved communication satellites, and Bred to Kill, 1960, by Martin Thomas included a scientist recreating prehistoric creatures. So there's a lot more here. He gets involved with World War I. He becomes a spy catcher, all sorts of really neat stuff. And thinking about how it started in 1893, and there have been over 200 authors who officially, not, pastiches or anything, officially wrote Sexton Blake stories. Maybe there's something to the Sexton Blake stories and the Sexton Blake character. Now, I'm not going to read the story right now. I'll read you a little sample of something, but I also want to show you something else that's absolutely fascinating. So if you go over, I should have the link. I've got it all set up. I want to show you an old 78 RPM recording that is from the old Sexton Blake radio show. And there are some of these that are available on YouTube. Okay. And what's really curious about this is that the actor who played Sexton Blake on the radio actually looked like the Sexton Blake drawings. And you can see here on the cover, he looks a lot like the Sherlock Holmes images from the original Strand. He's got that sort of high forehead, very thin sort of a deal going. They're very much like Sherlock Holmes. And then I won't even go into Solar Ponds. Solar Ponds, was that Algernon Blackwood? A creation. We'll talk about Solar Ponds later. I have some friends who've been publishing Solar Ponds novels, collections, new Solar Ponds stuff. Just great stuff. Really good stuff. So I want to show you this. I think you'll find this really interesting. So I'm going to go back, check this out, and it goes through a bit of a double thing here, but I just want to show you what it looks like.
Right, it's a bit of a rarity. It's a Sexton Blake story, actually, on a 12-inch 78 HMV record, and it stars the early talkies Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Wantner, who, although he was a little bit old playing Sherlock Holmes, actually bore quite a resemblance to those original drawings of Sherlock Holmes by Sidney Paget.
There you go. Now, HMV, his master's voice. If people are wondering what the HMV stood for the British music stores, it's his master's voice. And again, we get that. Isn't that fascinating? Gramophone.
Murder on the Portsmouth Road.
There's the actor right there. And he does resemble the Sidney Paget Sherlock Holmes. That's when he was playing Sherlock Holmes, actually. Interesting. He did some theater work as Sherlock Holmes.
It's the Murder on the Portsmouth Road. It's a small, sort of 5-minute drama on both sides of this 12-inch shellac record. And it's starring the famous Arthur Wantner and Company. Arthur Wantner was famous for his portrayal of Sherlock Holmes, one of the early portrayals of Sherlock Holmes in the sound movies. And although a little bit old for the part, he actually bore quite a resemblance to those original drawings by Sidney Paget of Sherlock Holmes. So it's nice to have him doing a detective drama on record. And it's amazing how you can fit a little drama into 5 minutes on one of these records. So, The Murder on the Portsmouth Road. Just talking in English.
Now, just to let you know, the sound here is not going to be all that great. I'm going to turn it down a little bit, but this gives you an example, and I think you'll enjoy going back in time here. You can tell it's almost impossible to understand if you're, getting something through the lines, and that would require me to record it and try to put it through some audio system like AI to get rid of, the tinniness and all that stuff. But what's really interesting about this is if you go to Michael Moorcock's introduction. Well, it's kind of funny because Moorcock frames the introduction like it's from the old Penny Dreadfuls. So he makes it look like it's actually the newsprint, like old-timey recreation of the newsprint. And they pretend that it's from 1907, from The Boy's Friend. And they write this. Michael Moorcock writes, "Does Sexton Blake exist? Almost every day I receive letters from my chums asking me this question. It serves to show the great enthusiasm which the great detective has aroused in the minds of the readers of our new serial Sexton Blake in the Congo, as well as our weekly complete novels, which appear in the Union Jack. Well, then, the great detective does exist, and very much so, as members of the criminal profession know to their cost. It is occasionally to be seen He is occasionally to be seen in his office, the whereabouts of which I am not permitted to disclose, other than to say that it is situated less than 5 miles from Charing Cross. Another thing I am not permitted to state is his name. For obvious reasons, he does not practice professionally under the name of Sexton Blake." So that's the opening from Michael Moorcock. And then he starts to explain what Sexton Blake was and stuff like that. Absolutely interesting stuff. He says, in those years before AP were sure where to aim their Blake stories, we saw him go from one of the many stiff-collared detecting gents aimed at audiences hungry for more Holmes-like cases and presented as they might appear in such respectable magazines as The Strand, Pearson's, or The London, bought very much for fiction by the likes of Arthur Morrison, Baroness Orsi, Joseph Conrad, H.G. Wells, J.K. Chesterton, and Jack London, accompanied by solid wash drawings of the protagonists. In Blake's case, his clash with the evil Marston Hume, first of his enemies with a notable personality, by the excellent and mysterious Michael Storm, were amongst the earliest to be presented in this way. But clearly, he was found to be popular with the boys who bought the massive bedsheet-size weeklies AP published, including Boy's Herald, Boy's Realm, and Boy's Friend, which ran long serials containing most of the hallmarks of the boys' adventure fiction of the day, including a great deal of jocular bandages and slapstick between characters. So you can see, obviously, they were popular there, so they started to attract that interest. And this is the first story that they have in this book. It doesn't actually have the very first story, The Missing Millionaire. This one is A Duel to the Death. And there's the Union Jack Library cover of that time. Isn't that great? A magnificent, long, complete detective novel introducing Zenith, the albino, one of the most fascinating and amazing personalities in present-day fiction. The first chapter, The Stars of Ood. It was a wild night. Wind, thunder, and rain made weird organ music around the New Caister Hotel. Out there by the old castle, midway between the low and desolate flats and the turbulent North Sea, the few buildings that existed reeled and complained beneath the assault of the gale, while out on the submerged sands, wave after wave fell with a sound awe-inspiring and sad. Within the hotel was desolation of another kind. Sexton Blake Detective. Ta-da! You'll have lots of fun reading Sexton Blake stories. I think you'll enjoy Sexton Blake. That's a great collection to get, too. It's not that expensive. You can find it. Just look up the one edited by George Mann with the introduction from Michael Moorcock. You can get it for under $10. It's great. And they're stories. They're long stories, short stories. There's one that's like 5 pages. Maybe I'll read that on Friday. You might enjoy that one. It's great stuff. Sexton Blake Detective radio series all around that you can find even on old 78 RPMs, and you can find old radio shows. But be careful. Please be careful when you do see these things. Watch out for spoilers. If you see anybody talking about Sexton Blake, watch out for spoilers. Any of those things, just be super careful of spoilers. It's sometimes people say, and now, you know what happened? Spoiler, and then they don't even like wait or whatever. Hopefully I'm not, at fault of doing that very often. But I will leave you with that, a little Sexton Blake. Check it out, and I think you'll have a grand old time with some fun reading. I want to say thank you again for watching us. Please head over to the former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel, see what's happening over there, and share the links with your friends. Open up that tab, subscribe at YouTube, subscribe at Rumble. Former Star Trek Writing Fellow. There'll be a new episode out tomorrow about the David Morrell conversation that we had, and also. Actually, it'll be a short story that I read. Then also, if you get the opportunity, feel free to check out the podcast, the audios, and to subscribe at my Substack for the daily news notes. That's always a really big deal. It's a great way to help out the Liberty Conspiracy. And thanks, everybody, for contributing. When you get the opportunity, check out the David Knight Show. David was rocking today with Eric Peters. And as I mentioned, if you looked in the background of Eric's books, on his shelf, he had a book called The Bunker. The author of The Bunker was a scholar in resident in my dorm. He lived on my floor, and he was one of the first Western reporters or Allied reporters in Hitler's bunker. And that's what it's all about. He would tell us about how he went into the bunker and stuff. It's very interesting. So I've got that book over there. You can't see it, obviously. The Russians are holding on to it. So, okay, I better roll. Thank you, everyone. Again, if you want to contribute and help, subscribe over at the Substack, a few bucks a month. That is key. We'll tell you more about the news. We'll check out David Knight's conversation tomorrow. Travis will be filling in for most of the day, I'm sure. And what's tomorrow? Thursday? Tony will be doing his show, the Arterburn Radio Experience. So I will hit the road for now, everyone. Thank you for hanging out. We're going to leave with the Outer Limits and, of course, the Control Voice, handing power back to you.
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the Control Voice will take you to the Outer Limits.